Imagine your smartwatch buzzing, right? You glance down, and it's not a text message or a calendar reminder.
Yeah, something totally different.
Exactly. It's actually the government. And they're asking you to cast your vote on an agricultural subsidy.
Which is wild to think about. But then, say, 10 minutes later, it buzzes again.
Right. And this time, it's a localized tax reform bill. I mean, on the surface, this sounds like the ultimate democratic utopia.
Total participation.
Yeah, just absolute power directly in your hands all day, every day. But researchers at the European Union recently took this exact scenario and they ran it through a simulator.
And the results they got are actually kind of terrifying.
They really are. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to cut through the noise of the daily news cycle and look at the actual future of European democracy.
Specifically, we're zooming way out to the year 2050.
Right. We are exploring this genuinely fascinating 2026 report from the European Commission's Joint Research Center. It's titled Futures of EU Democracy.
And, usually when people talk about predicting the future, there is this expectation of magic.
Like you gaze into a crystal ball and suddenly everything is perfectly clear.
Right, exactly. But when you step into the world of systemic research and geopolitical strategy, you realize pretty quickly that foresight isn't a crystal ball at all. It's much more like a wind tunnel.
Oh, I love that analogy. Foresight isn't a crystal ball, it's a wind tunnel.
Yeah, because the researchers aren't trying to predict the exact color of the sky in 2050. They are testing the aerodynamics of our current society to figure out what might break under extreme pressure.
That makes so much sense. So we're basically taking the democratic systems we rely on today, putting them inside this simulator and blasting them with hurricane force trends just to see exactly where the cracks form.
Precisely. And the report tackles 3 core challenges that are putting immense pressure on our systems right now.
Right. And those are declining citizen support for democratic institutions, the fraying resilience of those institutions themselves, and of course, the incredibly disruptive impact of AI.
Yes, artificial intelligence is a massive factor here. So we are going to look at these extreme, almost sci-fi scenarios for the year 2050.
Just so we can understand the choices we need to make today, right?
Sure.
But before we fast forward to 2050, we really have to look at the present. I mean, how do researchers even begin to build these futures?
Well, they build them by identifying what they call weak signals or emerging issues.
Okay.
And the methodology relies on this idea called dialectical waves of change.
Okay. Dialectical waves of change. That sounds heavily academic. Let's try to ground that for everyone listening. What does that actually mean?
Sure. Think of it as a constant clash of forces. So you have the status quo, the way our political and economic systems operate right now.
Right, the normal everyday stuff.
Exactly. That is the thesis. But bubbling just beneath the surface, you have these emerging, somewhat radical behaviors or new ideas that directly contradict that status quo.
So that would be the antithesis.
You got it. A weak signal is essentially a tiny ripple happening today that suggests a massive wave of change is coming tomorrow.
I see.
And when the status quo and this new wave inevitably collide, a completely new reality is formed.
Wow. And the report highlights some incredibly fascinating weak signals happening right now. Things you might not even realize are actually political.
Right, like youth values, for example.
Yes. We constantly hear this narrative that young people are, disengaged from politics, that they just don't care. But the report argues they're actually just redefining what participation means.
That is such a crucial distinction. Because behaviors we typically frame as purely economic or personal, they're actually deeply civic.
Give me an example of that.
Well, take the concept of quiet quitting, or the massive rise of the passion economy, where people monetize their hobbies outside of traditional corporate structures.
Right, like starting a small online shop instead of climbing the corporate ladder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The report identifies these not just as workforce trends, but as young people actively shifting away from traditional societal engagement toward alternative lifestyles.
So it's like, if you feel the traditional political system doesn't hear you, and the traditional economic ladder is broken, you simply withdraw. You withdraw your participation from the systems that support that structure.
Yeah, you create a parallel track, which is a profound political statement, even if it doesn't involve casting a ballot.
That is so interesting. But that quiet withdrawal, it leaves a power vacuum, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Okay.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
Yeah.
If citizens are stepping back, someone else has to step up to make the decisions.
And that leads to the signal that really caught my eye in this report. There is a growing, measurable appetite for technocrats.
Yes, the non-elected experts.
Right, people wanting them to hold executive power instead of elected politicians. The report points out that technocrats holding office across the EU actually grew from 9.5% to 14.2% between the years 2000 and 2020.
And if you look at the polling data over the last few years, that number is steadily climbing. Oh yeah, in many countries, citizens are increasingly stating they would actually prefer, like a university professor or an economist or a business leader to run the country, rather than a traditional politician they have to vote for.
Wait, hold on a second. Let's really think about what that means. We are seeing a measurable loss of faith in basic political gridlock, to the point where citizens are saying, just give me an unelected expert to dictate the policies.
It's just a stark shift.
Inherently, doesn't that completely undermine the entire foundation of why we elect leaders in the first place?
I mean, it absolutely challenges the core premise of representative democracy. There's no getting around that.
Right. So why is it happening?
Well, if we connect this to the psychology of the modern voter, the mechanism actually makes sense. When political fragmentation leads to endless coalition building and parties spend years debating without passing legislation.
Nothing gets done.
Exactly. Nothing gets done, and citizens get frustrated. They look at a crumbling bridge or a failing healthcare system, and they just want the problem solved.
So when a neutral, nonpartisan expert is brought in to fix the budget or solve a specific crisis, people applaud it because it's efficient.
Right. They just want the plumbing fix. They don't care if the plumber was elected. They just care that the water turns back on.
That makes total sense. And our desire for customized, efficient solutions brings us to the third weak signal, liquid democracy.
Ah, yes. Liquid democracy is actually a fascinating century-old concept. It goes all the way back over 130 years to thinkers like Lewis Carroll.
Wait, Lewis Carroll, like Alice in Wonderland?
The very same. The basic idea is that instead of voting for one representative every 4 years to handle every single issue, you have a fluid issue-by-issue choice.
Okay, break that down for me.
So for any given topic, you can vote on it directly yourself. Or, if you prefer, you can delegate your vote to someone you trust on that specific topic.
Okay, so let's say there is a massive vote on complex agricultural policy. I live in a city. I know absolutely nothing about farming or crop rotation.
Right, most city dwellers don't.
So I can temporarily delegate my voting power to an environmental scientist I follow and trust. But then, let's say the next week, there is a vote on digital privacy, which I care deeply about.
In that case, you just take your vote back and cast it yourself.
Wow, that is so fluid.
It is. Historically, trying to implement that was a logistical nightmare. I mean, imagine trying to track millions of fluidly shifting delegations on paper.
Oh, impossible.
But today, AI and blockchain technologies make this ledger system instantaneously feasible on a massive societal scale.
Okay, so we take these weak signals, youth withdrawing into alternative engagement, a deep frustration leading to a desire for hyper-efficient experts, and technology finally enabling liquid democracy.
Right. We take all of that.
We put those signals into our wind tunnel, turn the dial up to hurricane force, and fast forward to 2050. Let's see what happens if we give the people ultimate, unfiltered control.
This leads us directly to the first extreme scenario mapped out in the report, which is AI-facilitated direct democracy.
Okay, the smartwatch utopia.
Exactly. In this 2050 reality, we've essentially handed the steering wheel directly to the public. Citizens are voting on almost everything directly, using their wearable devices.
So this goes back to my smartwatch buzzing every 20 minutes, asking for my stance on municipal zoning laws.
Yep. And human-centered AI is running constantly in the background to make this possible. The AI takes a 500-page, incredibly dense political bill and translates it into 3 clear, digestible bullet points for you.
That sounds incredibly helpful, honestly.
It does. It compiles the public views in real time and even suggests optimal policy tweaks based on the collective mood of the nation. On paper, it is the ultimate democratic utopia. Complete transparency, total inclusivity.
But the wind tunnel reveals the cracks almost immediately, doesn't it? The report points out that this introduces a massive psychological burden. They call it mental overload.
Yes. Human beings only have so much cognitive bandwidth in a single day. If you are asked to make complex civic decisions on top of managing your job, your family, your personal life.
Fatigue sets in very quickly.
Exactly. The sheer volume of participation just becomes totally exhausting.
And so human nature kicks in. What do people do when they are overwhelmed by notifications? They automate them.
They absolutely do.
The report outlines that citizens get so overwhelmed by the daily voting that they just set up their personal AI profiles to blind vote for them based on their historical preferences.
Which completely undermines the point of the system.
Right. If an algorithm is just silently casting ballots for me based on some profile I set up years ago, it really makes you wonder, am I genuinely participating in a democracy at that point?
Probably not.
Or have I just downgraded myself to a political thermostat? I'm just sitting on the wall, regulating the temperature, completely oblivious to the actual conversation happening in the room.
I love that thermostat analogy.
Yeah.
That captures the danger perfectly. You are regulating the environment without active participation. And this leads to the rapid erosion of true representation.
Because my AI doesn't know how I've changed.
Exactly. If your AI is casting votes based on a static profile you established 5 years ago, it cannot account for how your empathy, your understanding, or your priorities might have evolved during a recent crisis.
Right. I might have changed my mind on a social issue after a personal experience, but the algorithm locks me into a rigid, outdated version of my past self.
It's terrifying when you think about it on a societal scale.
Wow. So direct democracy via AI eventually just becomes automated stagnation, which leads to a natural question. What if people just say, you know what, forget the tech, forget the daily votes, forget the system entirely, I'm out?
But that walking away is exactly what the researchers mapped as the second scenario. They call it citizen pushback.
Citizen pushback.
Yeah. In this future, disillusioned citizens completely abandon mainstream governance. They feel the central state is too slow, too automated, or just fundamentally failing them.
So what do?
They form self-governed off-grid communities. They rely entirely on decentralized mutual aid networks to survive and govern themselves locally.
I mean, honestly, I can absolutely see the appeal of that. It sparks incredible local innovation. People are truly physically engaged with their neighbors again.
Yes, the hyper-local engagement is very high.
They're pooling resources, they're growing their own food, making decisions by local consensus. It feels like a genuine, localized, democratic renewal.
And on a micro level, it is incredibly empowering. But the foresight process forces us to look at the macro level, what happens to the large-scale structures.
Right, the big picture.
The report highlights that this widespread withdrawal causes massive societal fragmentation. If everyone with the means retreats into their own hyperlocal, self-sustaining bubble, the broader social safety nets completely collapse.
No, of course, because an off-grid community of 500 people might be brilliant at managing a local food pantry or, like, setting up solar panels, but they simply cannot build a public hospital.
Exactly.
They cannot maintain a national healthcare system, a unified electrical grid, or a continent-wide transportation network.
And that is where the real tragedy of this scenario lies. The most vulnerable groups, the elderly, the disabled, those who simply cannot physically or economically participate in these rugged off-grid communities.
They get left behind.
They are left entirely stranded. The nation-state loses its tax base and its authority, completely losing its ability to protect the marginalized.
Man, so those first two futures show us the very real dangers of extreme citizen participation. You either burn out and hand your brain over to an AI, or you walk away and completely fracture society.
It's a lose-lose situation in the extremes.
So let's swing the pendulum to the exact opposite extreme. What happens if society looks at that mess and prioritizes pure, unadulterated efficiency over citizen participation?
This takes us into the third scenario, which is called technocratic governance overreach.
Ah, the experts taking charge.
Yes. The non-elected experts we mentioned in the week's signals earlier. By 2050, they haven't just been consulted. They've completely taken over all executive functions. Elected politicians are phased out in favor of specialized managers.
And the truly scary part about this scenario is that at first, people absolutely love it.
They do.
Yeah.
Because initially, it works remarkably well. The policies are deployed incredibly fast, they are effective, and they are completely free from the toxic partisan bickering that just exhausts us today.
Right. Complex crises like a pandemic or a massive supply chain failure are handled with cold, scientific precision.
The report calls this mechanism output-based legitimacy.
Output-based legitimacy. Okay, meaning the citizens don't really care how the decision was made, the democratic input. They only care that the result, the output, is good.
That's exactly the trade-off. If the trains run on time, the inflation rate is zero, and the carbon emissions are down, the citizens are totally happy to trade away their input.
But there's a sinister underbelly to this, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Over time, because citizens are so comfortable with the results, they just stop paying attention to the democratic procedures. The checks and balances slowly dissolve because nobody is enforcing them.
Parliaments and voting bodies basically just become mere rubber stamps for whatever the experts decree. This sounds exactly like handing your life over to a ruthless personal trainer.
Ah, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Sure, you get great results, the output is fantastic, you are in the best physical shape of your life, but you have absolutely zero freedom to eat a donut, sleep in, or question their methods. Your fundamental agency is just gone.
And just like that trainer might eventually push you into an unhealthy obsession or an injury, the technocratic system eventually falters.
How so?
Because when you remove pluralism, when you remove the messy, diverse, contradictory voices of the general public, you get systemic tunnel vision. Furthermore, the concept of scientific neutrality becomes weaponized.
Weaponized in what way?
Well, expertise is used to shut down legitimate debate. If you question a policy, you aren't just disagreeing. You are labeled as anti-science or anti-efficiency. Inclusivity is completely sacrificed on the altar of optimization.
Wow. Which paves the way for the ultimate dystopia. I mean, if the state becoming an unchallengeable machine is bad, what happens when the state is outpaced by the ultimate engine of efficiency, the corporation?
Yes, that is scenario 4, big tech power grab.
This is where the tech giants don't just influence the government, they actually evolve into corporate states themselves. This scenario gave me absolute chills.
It's deeply unsettling because of how plausible the mechanics are.
Exactly. In this future, meaningful citizenship is entirely commodified. Instead of being a citizen with inherent human rights protected by a constitution, you are merely a premium consumer bound by a terms of service agreement.
Right. And the researchers outline how these corporate states maintain control without ever needing a traditional police force.
They use things like justice coupons, right?
Yes, justice coupons, which is a terrifying evolution of token-based governance.
Let's expand on how this actually works. Imagine your street has a massive pothole or a broken streetlight. Today, you would call your city council representative. It might take a while, but it's a civic process.
A messy, slow civic process.
Right. But in this 2050 scenario, you log into an Amazon-style portal, you spend 3 justice coupons that you earn by recycling your corporate-branded packaging, and a corporate drone comes out to fill the pothole.
And you feel incredibly empowered. Because the problem was fixed in an hour.
But you have just traded your fundamental human right to safe public infrastructure for a digital loyalty rewards program.
It creates the perfect illusion of accountability. You feel like you have a voice because you are spending your little tokens to get immediate neighborhood fixes.
But the big picture is totally out of your hands.
Exactly. The ultimate systemic decisions, where the budget goes, how resources are allocated, who gets cut off, are being made in a corporate boardroom based purely on profit margins and algorithmic control.
And the way they enforce that control is deeply insidious. The report mentions the use of neurosensors and total data surveillance. Let's talk about the mechanics of that, because this isn't just a camera on a street corner.
It's not at all. This is biometric feedback integrated into the architecture of your life. Your wearable devices, your neural interfaces, your smart home, they're all constantly mining your mental state, your stress levels, your micro-expressions.
Wow.
They use this data to create hyper-individualized realities for every single person.
So let's say you are reading an article about a controversial policy the corporate state is pushing. Your wearable detects a slight spike in your cortisol levels and a change in your pupil dilation. The AI registers this as dissent stress.
Yes, dissent stress.
But instead of arresting you, which would cause a public outcry, the system just subtly alters your algorithmic reality. The next day, you simply never see an article about that policy again.
Your feed is just filled with cute animals and productivity hacks.
Exactly. You aren't thrown in a physical jail. Your reality is just quietly edited. You are algorithmically silenced.
Which results in the total death of the shared public sphere. If everyone is living in a hyper-individualized, perfectly curated feedback loop, collective action becomes literally impossible. You become socially and politically invisible without even realizing it.
Okay, we have officially been through the wind tunnel.
It's intense, isn't it?
It really is. We have seen the wreckage of these 4 extremes. But as we established at the very beginning, these scenarios aren't prophecies. They are warning signs.
Simulators designed to show us what breaks.
Right. So what does this all mean for us today? What are the core tensions we have to navigate right now in the present to ensure we don't end up in one of these dystopias?
Well, the JRC report distills the massive complexity of these features into a few vital core tensions that policymakers and citizens need to address immediately. And the first major tension is authentic versus performative participation.
Meaning, as we introduce all these new digital tools, are we actually practicing democracy or are we just play acting?
Right. To put it in the context of the scenarios, a justice coupon is performative participation. It gives you a task, but no real power.
Okay, so what would authentic participation look like?
A digital town hall that transparently tracks citizen input and genuinely alters a city's municipal budget. That is authentic participation. We need to demand policy design that establishes clear standards for what counts as real engagement.
There must be visible, verifiable feedback loops so that when a citizen participates, they can trace exactly how their voice influenced the final outcome.
Exactly. And the second core tension the report identifies is balancing efficiency with agency.
Because let's be honest, we all want fast, effective governance. We want the supply chains fixed, the potholes filled, and the climate crisis solved yesterday.
We do. But the lesson from the technocratic scenario is that fast governance cannot come at the cost of substantive citizen involvement. If we rely solely on AI models or unelected experts to accelerate the process, we systematically dismantle the checks and balances.
Checks and balances that protect society when those experts inevitably make a mistake.
Right. We have to fundamentally redefine what efficiency means in a democratic context so that it inherently includes inclusivity and pluralism.
Because a decision isn't truly efficient if it alienates half the population and sparks a massive societal backlash a year later.
Exactly the point. True. Long-term stability requires the friction of democratic debate. It's supposed to be somewhat messy.
Right. And the third major tension, which might actually be the most urgent based on that last corporate state scenario, is digital sovereignty.
This is critical for the survival of the modern state. We must begin treating essential digital services, things like cloud storage, identity verification, digital payment marketplaces, and civic communication platforms as critical public infrastructure.
We basically need to treat the cloud the exact same way we treat the water pipes or the national electrical grid.
Precisely. If we allow private, multinational tech monopolies to own and operate the fundamental plumbing of our civic and digital lives, we are fast-tracking ourselves directly into scenario 4.
Right, the corporate state.
Yeah. Public authorities must invest in and ensure the creation of open, transparent, and resilient digital systems that are not entirely dependent on the whims of a few corporate boardrooms.
So why should you, listening right now, care about this today? Because the future of democracy is not going to be decided by one dramatic, cinematic event. It is being shaped right now by our micro decisions.
That is so true.
Every time you blindly accept a tech platform's terms of service without a second thought about your biometric data, or every time you skip a local election because you assume the experts will handle it.
Or every time you withdraw from a civic conversation because it feels too slow.
Right. You are casting a tiny invisible vote for which of these 2050 scenarios we actually end up in. Our daily actions are the wind inside that tunnel.
That is the ultimate takeaway from the foresight process. We actually have the technological tools and the social awareness to build an incredibly responsive, deeply inclusive, and highly effective democratic system.
The emerging signals aren't inherently bad, right? They just require active management.
Exactly. But we can only build that utopia if we stay awake at the wheel and consciously navigate these intertwined forces.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started by looking at the weak signals bubbling up in our society right now. Youth withdrawing from the traditional social contract into alternative economies.
The rising seductive allure of the hyper-efficient technocrat.
And the new technological reality making liquid democracy actually possible. We threw those signals into the simulator and watched them extrapolate into extreme futures. We saw the cognitive burnout of an AI-driven direct democracy.
We saw the fractured, vulnerable isolation of off-grid citizen pushback.
The suffocating, optimized reality of technocratic overreach, and of course the terrifying, algorithmically silenced illusion of the corporate tech state.
And through all of those extreme stress tests, the recurring mechanism that breaks is the balance between our desire for easy solutions and our fundamental need for human agency.
Which brings me to a final lingering thought for you to take with you. Think back to that century-old concept of liquid democracy we unpacked earlier. The idea that you can fluidly delegate your vote to someone else.
It's a powerful tool, but a dangerous one.
Right. If the technology of tomorrow allows you to seamlessly delegate your voting power to an environmental expert or a popular social media influencer, or even to a highly personalized AI that mathematically knows your historical preferences better than you do,
Which is very likely to happen.
at what exact point do you cross the invisible line from intelligently delegating your civic duty to simply becoming a consumer of your own governance?
It is a profound structural question. Because once you transition into merely consuming governance like a streaming service, the wind tunnel tells us the entire democratic architecture is already deeply compromised.
Something to mull over the next time your devices ask you to tap agree on a screen, or the next time you feel the urge to just let the algorithm decide for you. Keep your eyes on the wind tunnel. We will catch you on the next deep dive. You know, right now, at this exact millisecond, you are performing an absolute miracle.
Oh, definitely. A completely invisible one, too.
Right, because, I am vibrating my vocal cords, pushing air into a microphone, which is converting those acoustic waves into digital data.
And then that data is streaming into your device, turning back into sound waves and hitting your eardrum.
Exactly, sending all these electrical signals into your brain, and somehow, out of all that physics and biology, you are extracting meaning.
Yeah, you're hearing these words, interpreting them, and probably forming some sort of opinion about them right now.
And it is entirely seamless to you. You don't feel the neurons firing or the synapses bridging. It just happens.
We are completely blind to our own mental machinery, which is wild to think about.
And that mind-bending reality is exactly what today's deep dive is all about. We are taking a really comprehensive look at a Wikipedia article on cognition to decode that invisible machinery humming inside your head.
Right. Because the mission here isn't just to, rattle off some dry textbook definition of a scientific term.
No, we want to cut through all that heavy academic jargon and look at the actual mechanisms, the how and the why. We really want to give you a true understanding of your own mind.
We want you to be able to catch your brain in the act of thinking.
Which is a pretty profound goal,
Yeah.
especially considering humanity has spent thousands of years trying to figure out how to study something we literally cannot see.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. But to start, we really should lay down a foundational baseline from the text.
Let's do it.
So the word cognition comes from the Latin root cognoscere, which literally means to know or to learn. So broadly speaking, cognition encompasses all the mental processes that deal with knowledge and information.
So it's essentially like the entire life cycle of data inside your head.
Precisely. It involves acquiring information from the outside world, transforming it into something usable, storing it, and retrieving it when you need it.
Like pulling a file from a hard drive.
Exactly. And ultimately applying it to interact with your environment. So when you're reading an article or learning some complex new software at work, or even just trying to remember where you left your keys, you are engaging in cognition.
But wait, if cognition is strictly about, knowledge and information and data processing, where do my messy emotions fit into this?
Oh, that's a great question.
Like if I get a sudden spike of panic right before public speaking, or a rush of joy when I see my family, is that cognition? Or is cognition just the cold, hard, logical stuff?
That is actually a massive debate in psychology right now. And according to the sources, there isn't really a universally agreed upon answer.
Oh, really? I would have thought they had that sorted out by now.
Not at all. So on one side, you have these hardline cognitivists, and their view is that essentially all mental phenomena, even raw feelings, are cognitions.
Wait, how does that work?
Well, they argue that an emotion like fear doesn't just, spontaneously generate from nothing. It requires an underlying cognitive evaluation.
Meaning my brain has to do the math on a threat before my body can react with panic.
Exactly. You have to process the visual data of, say, a snarling dog, retrieve memories associated with danger, and project a future outcome of getting bitten.
And all that happens in a fraction of a second.
Right. All of that happens instantly to trigger the physiological state of fear. So to a cognitivist, emotion is really just the physical output of a high-speed cognitive calculation.
Okay, I see the logic there, but it also feels slightly reductive. Like a sudden wave of panic just fundamentally doesn't feel like the same biological mechanism as calculating a math problem.
And that exact skepticism is why many researchers draw a strict line between cognition, which they define as abstract reasoning, memory, perception, and raw affect, which covers feelings and emotions.
So they treat them as completely different systems.
Yeah, they argue those are two separate parallel systems that interact, sure, but operate on entirely different biological architectures.
Okay, it makes sense to view them as two distinct operating systems. But before we can get to the grand theories of how the whole brain works as an integrated unit, we really need to look at the individual stations on the mind's assembly line.
Right, like how does raw data from the outside world actually transform into a coherent thought?
Exactly. And according to the text, it all starts with perception and attention.
Yeah, perception is the first major station. It's the process of organizing and interpreting sensory information. We mentioned the sound waves hitting your eardrum earlier.
Or light bouncing off objects and hitting your retinas.
Exactly. These physical stimuli are detected by receptors and transmitted to the brain as raw electrical signals.
But the brain doesn't just hand you a spreadsheet of raw sensory data, right? It hands you a finished product. It gives you this seamless, high-definition experience. How is it doing that translation so incredibly quickly?
Honestly, it does it by cheating. Well, to be more scientific about it, by using heuristics. The brain is highly efficient, processing every single pixel of reality, every fluctuation in light, from scratch every millisecond. That would take an astronomical amount of biological energy.
Your brain would literally overheat.
It would. So to conserve energy, cognitive processes rely on these heuristics. They're basically mental shortcuts to reduce cognitive labor.
Size constancy is a really great way to visualize this shortcut in action. Like if you see a car driving away from you down a long road, the actual physical image hitting your retina is shrinking, right?
Yep, getting smaller and smaller.
But from the perspective of pure data, you don't perceive the car as physically deflating like a balloon.
Right, because your brain uses a heuristic.
Yeah.
It assumes the physical properties of objects remain constant, so it automatically interprets that shrinking sensory data as the object increasing its distance from you.
So it just overrides the raw data with a pre-programmed rule about how the physical world works.
Exactly. It saves so much time.
But the brain is doing all of this automated processing while being bombarded by millions of stimuli at once. I mean, the feeling of your socks on your feet, the hum of the refrigerator, a text message popping up.
Right. If the brain tried to apply heuristics to every single piece of data hitting your nervous system, it would still crash.
Which brings us to the next vital station on the assembly line, which is attention. Attention is the filtering mechanism.
Yes, it prioritizes specific aspects of the environment while actively suppressing irrelevant information.
I kind of picture this like a really busy nightclub. Perception is the chaotic crowd of people outside on the street, all the sights, the sounds, the smells trying to get in.
I like this, okay.
But attention is the bouncer standing at the velvet rope. The bouncer strictly prioritizes who gets in. It's like, you, the important email, come in. You, the humming refrigerator, stay out.
And to take that nightclub analogy a step further, the bouncer isn't just passively letting people in based on a guest list. That bouncer is actively shoving people away.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it's a mechanism called cognitive inhibition. Your brain is actually expending metabolic energy to actively suppress the sound of that refrigerator so that it doesn't interrupt your focus on the email.
So it's an active blockade, not just a passive filter.
Precisely.
But there's a serious flaw in the bouncer system, isn't there? Because these heuristics, these evolutionary shortcuts the brain takes to manage the crowd, they can be hijacked. And that's basically all an optical illusion is, right?
Oh, completely. Optical illusions aren't a glitch in your physical eyes. They're a glitch in your cognitive heuristics.
The bouncer lets the wrong person into the club because they were wearing a really convincing disguise.
That's exactly it. Our brain's shortcuts are optimized for the natural world. So when we encounter artificial patterns that are specifically designed to exploit those shortcuts, the brain misinterprets the data.
Like bending straight lines into curves.
Right, because it's trying to force a 2D image into a 3D spatial heuristic.
Okay, so the bouncer lets the information into the club. We've perceived it, we're attending to it. How do we actually think about it? Because we have to organize it somehow.
We do that through categorization. So once information is in, we use concepts to sort reality into manageable buckets. But the source points out we really have to distinguish between two very different types of concepts.
Logical concepts and natural concepts.
Exactly. Logical concepts are rigid. They're defined by strict, unbending rules.
Like in mathematics or coding. You know, a triangle is a polygon with 3 edges and 3 vertices, period. If it has 4 edges, it is kicked out of the triangle bucket.
There is no such thing as a sort of triangle.
Right. But most of human reality doesn't really operate like a geometry textbook.
And that is where natural concepts do the heavy lifting. Natural concepts are based on fuzzy resemblance and utility without clear-cut boundaries.
Like the concept of a table.
Yeah, a standard dining table has 4 legs and a flat top. But a pedestal table with just one thick center column is obviously still a table.
Right, but let's push that. What if I move into a new apartment, I don't have any furniture yet, and I eat my dinner off a flattened cardboard box on the floor?
Okay.
Am I functionally categorizing that cardboard box as a table? Like, is my brain categorizing actual garbage as furniture?
In that exact moment.
Yeah.
Functionally, yes. Because natural concepts don't care about dictionary definitions. They care about utility and neural weighting.
Right.
Your brain recognizes that the cardboard box shares enough functional properties with a table. You know, it's flat, it elevates your food, you sit around it, that it crosses that fuzzy threshold into the table category.
That's wild. So once we have these concepts, both logical and natural, we begin to manipulate them, and that is reasoning. We are drawing inferences and solving problems by basically bouncing these concepts off each other.
And reasoning operates on a spectrum of certainty. The most rigorous end of that spectrum is deductive reasoning, which follows strict rules of logical inference.
So if the premises are true, the conclusion is mathematically guaranteed to be true.
Right, like a basic if-then statement in computer programming.
If a system is in a complete vacuum, gravity accelerates all objects equally. We are observing objects in a complete vacuum, therefore they will accelerate equally. It is a completely closed loop of absolute certainty.
But as you know, humans rarely operate in closed loops of absolute certainty. Most of our daily lives require navigating profound uncertainty.
And that relies on non-deductive reasoning, specifically, according to the article, a really common mechanism called abductive reasoning.
Yes.
Wait, I want to clarify the mechanics here, because when I hear non-deductive reasoning, my mind instantly jumps to inductive reasoning.
Which is very common.
Like observing 100 consecutive days of sunshine and concluding it will be sunny tomorrow. Inductive is about generalizing from patterns. How is abductive reasoning different?
That's a really great distinction. So inductive reasoning generalizes a broad rule from lots of specific observations. Abductive reasoning is entirely different. It's about finding the best possible explanation for a specific, isolated set of clues.
Oh, so it's essentially playing detective.
Exactly. Think about a systems administrator who sees a server crash, and the error logs show a specific spike in traffic, right, followed by a memory leak.
They can't strictly deduce what happened because a dozen different things could cause those exact symptoms.
Correct. But they use abductive reasoning to infer that, say, a malicious DDoS attack is the most rational, logical explanation that accounts for all the specific evidence.
So it's not a guarantee. I mean, it could theoretically be some bizarre internal software glitch happening at the exact moment a viral video drove traffic to the site.
Sure, but the attack is the best explanation.
Okay, so to summarize the assembly line. Perception brings the raw physical data in. Attention actively filters and suppresses the noise. Concepts organize the surviving data into fuzzy buckets. And reasoning lets us play detective to figure out what it all means.
That's the factory flow, yeah.
But this leads to the ultimate question. Who or what is actually running the factory?
And now we step into the realm of cognitive architecture. This is the blueprint of how all these components interact holistically.
Right, and for decades, cognitive science has been dominated by two massive rival theories attempting to explain this grand design.
The first one is classical computationalism.
And classical computationalism makes a very bold claim. It doesn't just say the mind is a metaphor for a computer. It argues that the mind literally is a computer.
That is the core premise. It posits that human cognition is fundamentally formal symbol manipulation.
Okay, unpack that.
Basically, it argues that your brain represents all information through internal strings of symbols, and it processes those strings using strict mechanical syntactic rules.
But wait, if it's just rule following, where does the meaning come from?
What do you mean?
Well, if my brain is just moving symbols around like a giant game of Tetris based on their shape, why do I actually understand what I'm saying right now? Like, a pocket calculator doesn't know what the number 3 means.
No, it doesn't.
It just has a mechanical rule that says input A plus input B triggers output C. Are you saying we are just biological calculators?
According to strict classical computationalism, yes. The theory suggests that human reasoning, planning, and language processing all happen at this fundamental structural level.
So the meaning doesn't matter to the machine.
Exactly. The syntax, the structure, and the rules drives the operation entirely independently of the semantics or the meaning of the symbols. The understanding you feel is basically just a byproduct of highly complex, flawless rule execution.
Man, that is tough to swallow. But there is a sub-theory within this camp that actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. The language of thought hypothesis.
Oh yes, mental ease. Mental ease is a brilliant concept for solving a very specific problem in cognitive science. How would you explain it?
Well, the hypothesis suggests that before you ever think a thought in English or Spanish or Japanese, your brain is processing concepts using a built-in pre-linguistic internal code.
Right.
Mental ease is essentially the foundational operating system of your brain.
Exactly. And the mechanism of mental ease is necessary to explain how a baby, or even certain animals, can think before they have ever acquired a spoken language.
Right, because a pre-verbal toddler can clearly form a complex desire, like, I want that toy on the shelf, but I am too short to reach it, so I need to cry to get an adult to hand it to me.
They don't have the English vocabulary to form that sentence, but they clearly have the complex thought.
Because, they're processing those beliefs and desires using this internal structural grammar of mental ease.
Their internal symbols combine into strings following strict syntactic rules, which generates the thought, which then drives the behavior.
It provides a really clean, structured explanation, but if you actually look at the biological hardware of a human brain, it doesn't look like a silicon microchip processing linear step-by-step code.
No, it doesn't.
It looks like a massive, chaotic, interconnected web of neurons.
Which is the exact criticism that birthed the massive rival theory to computationalism, which is connectionism.
Okay, let's talk about connectionism.
Connectionism argues that treating the brain like a linear computer is fundamentally flawed. Instead, it models the mind as a complex, decentralized network of interconnected nodes.
So it completely throws out the idea of central step-by-step processing.
Yes, it replaces it with parallel processing.
Let's visualize how information moves through this web, because it's not random, right?
It's highly structured, but in layers. So you have the input layer, which receives the raw sensory data from the world.
Right.
That layer sends signals deeper into the web to hidden intermediary layers where the actual computation happens. And those hidden layers eventually fire signals to an output layer, which dictates your final thought or action.
So if classical computationalism is like a single master chef in a kitchen strictly following a highly complex, rigid, step-by-step recipe to bake a cake,
Right.
connectionism is more like a massive jazz band.
Oh, I like that. Let's expand on that jazz band. The crucial detail of connectionism is that in this jazz band, there is absolutely no conductor.
So there's no master chef. There's no central boss neuron telling the other neurons what the final thought should be.
Exactly. So how does the music actually get made?
Well, every single individual musician, every node is incredibly simple, right?
Yes. They don't know the whole song. They are only listening to the volume of the specific musicians directly next to them.
And if the signal they receive crosses a certain threshold, they play their note. And if it doesn't, they just stay quiet.
And through a process of shifting the weights or the importance of these connections over time, which, by the way, is how learning occurs, the nodes fine-tune their responses.
And the song, the complex human thought, just spontaneously emerges from thousands of simple nodes playing their individual parts in parallel.
That is the magic of emergence. Complex intelligence arises from the decentralized interaction of simple parts.
And if this layered, weighted network of nodes sounds familiar to anyone listening, it's because this is the exact architecture underlying modern artificial intelligence.
Oh, 100%. The neural networks powering the AI revolution today, the large language models, the image generators, they are direct mathematical descendants of the connectionist models of human cognition.
We are literally building our most advanced technology in the image of our own biological jazz band.
It's pretty amazing.
But it's wild to think about the history here, because listening to us debate the nuances of syntactic symbol manipulation versus parallel neural emergence, it makes it sound like we've always had this incredibly sophisticated grasp on the mind.
We most certainly have not. Studying cognition is uniquely frustrating because you're trying to measure something that is fundamentally invisible.
Right. A cardiologist can dissect a heart and watch the valves pump. A neurologist can look at the physical tissue of a brain.
But you cannot put a thought under a microscope.
So how did we actually get from ancient philosophers guessing about the soul to building AI neural networks? It obviously wasn't a straight line.
No, it was a very bumpy ride. You had ancient philosophers like Aristotle trying to map it out. Later, you had Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke proposing the blank slate theory.
Arguing that the mind has no built-in rules and learns everything purely through sensory experience.
Exactly. But the most massive roadblock in the history of cognitive science happened in the early 20th century with the rise of behaviorism.
Led by figures like John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner. And their logic, while incredibly frustrating in hindsight, kind of makes strict methodological sense.
Their argument was that science requires observable, objective, measurable data.
Which is fair.
Sure. But since internal mental states, thoughts, feelings, heuristics, mentales are strictly unobservable, they argued that science should completely ignore them.
Wow.
Radical behaviorists decreed that psychology should only study what can be seen, the external stimulus that goes into an organism, and the observable behavioral response that comes out. The mind itself was deemed a black box that shouldn't be touched.
That is like trying to understand how a car engine works by only looking at the driver, pushing the gas pedal down, and watching the tires spin, but flat out refusing to ever pop the hood.
It's worse than that. Behaviorists didn't just refuse to open the hood. They essentially welded the hood shut and claimed that whatever was inside the engine block was irrelevant to the science of motion.
Just map the inputs and the outputs, and you've solved psychology.
Pretty much.
But eventually, that approach had to hit a massive wall. You cannot explain complex human behavior, especially things like language acquisition or creative problem solving, just by mapping inputs and outputs. You have to cut the weld. You have to open the hood.
And that profound frustration is exactly what sparked the cognitive revolution in the 1950s. It was a massive paradigm shift.
And crucially, it didn't just come from psychologists. It required an interdisciplinary rebellion.
Yes, you had pioneers in the brand new field of computer science, like Alan Newell and Herbert Simon, proving that machines could simulate human problem solving.
Showing that you actually could model invisible processes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And concurrently, you had linguists like Noam Chomsky completely dismantling the behaviorist view of language.
Because Chomsky proved that children generate entirely novel sentences they have never heard before.
Right. And that is impossible under strict stimulus and response conditioning. It proved the existence of internal, universal generative grammar. It proved the existence of the machinery.
That realization birthed modern cognitive science, a true mashup of psychology, neuroscience, linguistics, and artificial intelligence.
And decades later, the invention of fMRI and brain imaging technologies finally gave them the flashlight they needed to look inside the black box.
They could finally see which physical regions of the biological hardware lit up when the abstract software of the mind was running a specific task.
It finally bridged the gap between the physical brain and the abstract mind.
So what does this massive journey mean for you, the person listening right now? It means that you are currently operating a machine of unfathomable, staggering complexity.
Every single day.
Every time you navigate a new city or read the room to see if your joke landed or evaluate a moral dilemma, you aren't just doing it. A miraculous, invisible collaboration is firing off in milliseconds.
Evolutionary heuristics are filtering out the sensory noise.
Natural concepts are categorizing the chaos. Weighted neural networks are playing their parallel jazz band song to present you with a finished, polished thought. You are now equipped to notice the mechanics of your own existence.
And as you go forward noticing those mechanics, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative concept from the sources regarding how your brain actually interfaces with reality.
Oh, I'm ready.
We talked earlier about how the brain uses shortcuts to save energy. Well, the ultimate energy-saving theory in modern cognitive science is called predictive coding, or Bayesianism.
Where the brain predicts outcomes to handle uncertainty, but what is the actual mechanism there?
The mechanism is called prediction error. Processing raw sensory data from scratch takes a relatively long time biologically. By the time your brain processes the visual data of, say, a baseball flying at your face, it would already have hit you.
So your brain doesn't passively wait for data?
No. It actively hallucinates the immediate future. It projects its own internal model onto the world.
Wait, it hallucinates reality before it happens?
Yes. Your brain predicts what you are about to see, hear, and feel. And the raw sensory data coming from your eyes and ears is only used to check the brain's math.
That is
The
insane.
only information that actually gets processed up the chain is the prediction error, basically the sensory data that contradicts your brain's hallucination. If the world matches the prediction, your brain just lets you experience the hallucination because it's computationally cheaper.
So wait, what does that imply about my experience of this exact moment?
Well, it raises a profound question about existence. Are you ever truly experiencing reality as it objectively happens? Or are you just constantly living inside your brain's best guess of what the world is about to do next, only occasionally being corrected by reality when your brain gets it wrong?
Wow.
Yeah. As you hear the final words of this sentence, are you actually hearing my voice? Or did your brain just predict the sound waves before they even hit your eardrum?
That is definitely something to chew on the next time you decide to trust your own senses. Imagine walking into a crime scene, right? You've got detectives carefully bagging evidence.
Measuring distances, dusting for prints, all that.
Exactly. They are following the clues wherever they lead to figure out what happened.
Right, because you build the case from the ground up, based strictly on the physical evidence you find, no matter how confusing it might be at first.
Right. But now, imagine a different detective walking into that exact same room.
Okay.
They step right over the muddy footprints. They completely ignore the fingerprints on the wall. Instead, they just point at this random, completely clean lamp in the corner and declare, I knew it. The
Right.
butler did it with the lamp.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
And from that moment on, they only collect evidence that makes the lamp look guilty. And they just throw everything else in the trash.
That is a brilliant visual for confirmation bias. I mean, you're completely working backward at that point.
It's working backward, and it is exactly what pseudoarchaeologists do every single day.
Literally every day.
So welcome to today's deep dive into the wild, weird, and sometimes, frankly, dangerous world of fringe history.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. We've been digging through a mountain of research on this, specifically a really comprehensive Wikipedia article as our foundation. And our mission today for you is to unpack what this phenomenon actually is, why so many people are drawn to it, and how actual, rigorous scientists are fighting back against just a massive tide of misinformation.
Because there's so much of it out there.
Oh, everywhere. I promise you, by the end of this conversation, you are going to know exactly how to spot fake history. And we're going to explore why human beings just absolutely love a good conspiracy theory.
It's a topic that sounds like it's just, harmless late-night television about ancient aliens.
Yeah, the guy with the crazy hair.
Exactly. But as we look closely at the history, the roots and the real-world consequences of pseudoarchaeology run incredibly deep.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the really wild claims, we have to define what we are actually looking at.
Good idea.
This field goes by a lot of names. People call it alternative archaeology, fringe archaeology, fantastic archaeology. But my personal favorite comes from the late editor of the journal Antiquity, a guy named Glenn Daniel, who memorably referred to it as bullshit archaeology.
A highly technical, very academic term, obviously.
clearly.
But, he wasn't just being inflammatory. The core characteristic that all these fringe theories share,
Yeah.
whether they are talking about lost continents like Atlantis, ancient astronauts, or trying to prove biblical literalism, is a complete and total absence of the scientific method.
Right.
Professional archaeology is recursive. You test hypotheses against data. And if the physical data proves you wrong, well, you have to change your hypothesis.
You follow the fingerprints, not the lamp.
Precisely. Pseudoarchaeologists do the exact opposite. They start with a favored conclusion, which is almost always based on intuition, religious dogma, or nationalism.
Which we'll definitely get into later.
Oh, absolutely. And then they either cherry pick or outright falsify the data to fit that conclusion. Take stratigraphy, for example.
Okay.
In real archaeology, the layers of Earth are everything. It's like a laundry basket.
Our laundry basket.
Yeah, think about it. The clothes at the very bottom were put there first, right? So they're the oldest.
Okay, tracking.
The clothes on top are the newest. You have to pull them out carefully, layer by layer, to understand the timeline. A pseudo-archaeologist will just reach all the way to the bottom, yank out a sock, hold it up next to a shirt from the top, and claim they were worn on the exact same day.
That is wild. Practicing pseudoarchaeology is like doing a crossword puzzle by writing in whatever letters you want, ignoring the clues completely, and then bragging to all your friends that you solved it.
What's fascinating here is how they managed to make Those random letters seem like they actually fit to an untrained eye.
How do they do that?
A classic technique is stripping artifacts completely out of their original cultural context. They rely heavily on these very generalized visual comparisons.
Like what?
So a fringe theorist will look at a step pyramid in Egypt and a step pyramid in Mexico. They will completely strip away all the local history, the radiocarbon dating, the cultural nuances.
Just ignore all the actual science.
Exactly. And simply say to the audience, look, they both have a vaguely similar shape, therefore, they must have been built by the exact same lost civilization.
They completely erase the context. I mean,
Yeah.
building a big pile of rocks with a wide base so it doesn't fall over isn't evidence of Atlantis. It's just gravity.
Exactly. But when real archaeologists point out that these two monuments were built thousands of years apart, by completely different societies for completely different reasons, the fringe theorists don't just say, oh, my mistake.
Right, they go on the offensive. And this brings us to how they actually convince so many millions of people to believe them. They play the ultimate underdog card.
They really do.
They claim that mainstream academia is this massive, sinister church of science conspiracy. It's like a player who is losing a game of chess, so they just flip the board over and loudly accuse their opponent of cheating.
That's exactly it.
You see this all over your social media feeds today, right? The guy shouting that the world is flat gets 1 million views by claiming he's fighting the system, while the physicist patiently explaining gravity gets completely ignored.
It's a very effective playbook, unfortunately. People like Robert Bauval, a prominent pseudoarchaeologist, they portray academics as this global powerhouse acting as ruthless gatekeepers of the truth.
Like they're hiding something.
Exactly, ready to crush anyone they perceive as a heretic. They dismiss actual experts as being unadventurous, just sitting in dusty libraries, terrified to challenge orthodoxies because they might lose their comfortable university tenure.
But the contradiction here is just mind-blowing to me. They claim to hate the establishment, they call scientists a corrupt cabal, but at the exact same time, they are absolutely desperate for academic validation.
Oh, they crave it.
Look at Graham Hancock, one of the most famous fringe authors out there. In his book, Fingerprints of the Gods, he tries to legitimize the pole shift hypothesis.
Right, that one.
Which is this wildly fringe idea of a sudden catastrophic shift in the Earth's crust. And he does it by repeatedly pointing out that Albert Einstein once commented positively on it. Wait, hold on. So they hate experts, but they use Einstein to prove their point.
That's a bit hypocritical.
But Einstein was a theoretical physicist, not a geologist. And plate tectonics, the actual science of how the Earth's crust moves, wasn't even widely accepted by science until after Einstein died. That feels like a massive blind spot.
It is a massive blind spot, and it perfectly illustrates how they use the illusion of authority rather than actual mechanical evidence. Now, to be fair to the critics, professional archaeologists like Colin Renfrew do openly acknowledge that academia is often resistant to radical new ideas.
Academia can be slow.
But that's not because of some shadowy conspiracy to hide the truth.
It's because the scientific method demands rigorous proof.
Exactly. Overturning entrenched, well-documented positions requires extraordinarily compelling data. If you're going to claim gravity doesn't work, you better have a mountain of peer-reviewed math. And as historians like Garrett Fagan point out, pseudoarchaeologists simply do not have that data. They have rhetoric.
So if they just don't have the goods, why not just ignore them? It's very easy to look at guys on TV pointing to the stars and talking about Atlantis as just harmless, entertaining fun. Let them write their sci-fi books, right?
You'd think so.
But the research takes a very serious turn here because when you look at who actually benefits from these theories, it gets incredibly dark, incredibly fast. This isn't just about ratings or book sales. Pseudoarchaeology has routinely been used to support racialized nationalism, white supremacy, and violent colonialism.
That is a critical point that usually gets totally lost in the entertainment value. When you start with an a priori conclusion, meaning a conclusion you've decided is absolutely true before you've even looked at a single piece of evidence.
Got it.
That conclusion is almost always heavily influenced by the prejudices of the era you live in. Look at what happened in the 1930s. Nazi Germany actually created an entire organization called the Ahnenerbe.
I hadn't heard of this.
Yeah, this was literally a state-funded pseudo-archaeology department. They sent heavily funded expeditions to places like the ancient ruins of Tiwanaku in Bolivia, led by men like Edmund Kiss.
And I'm guessing they weren't there to just learn about Bolivian history.
Not at all. They were there explicitly to find evidence of an ancient Aryan master race to justify their ideology of global conquest.
Wow.
They would measure ancient skulls, ignore all local indigenous context, and try to construct a fake historical narrative that Germanic ancestors had built these incredible structures.
That is, wow. And it's not just an overseas phenomenon either. In North America, you had the incredibly damaging mound builder myth.
Yes, a huge example.
European colonizers pushed westward and found these massive, breathtakingly complex earthworks and mounds across the continent, like the ones at Cahokia. These were sprawling cities.
Massive urban centers.
But instead of attributing them to the Native American ancestors who actually built them, the colonizers refused to believe indigenous people were capable of such engineering. So they created this elaborate myth of a lost, non-native race, maybe from Europe, maybe from the Middle East, who supposedly built the mounds and were then tragically wiped out by the Native Americans.
Right, because it provided a very convenient moral justification for driving Native Americans off their land. You also see this with the Kensington runestone in Minnesota.
What's that one?
It's a slab of rock covered in runes, quote-unquote discovered in the late 19th century, which was used for decades to allege that Nordic Vikings were actually the primary and original explorers of the American Midwest, totally bypassing indigenous history.
So what does this all mean? It means that stealing a culture's history is the ultimate form of colonialism. You're not just taking their land in the present, you're taking their legacy in the past.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these aren't just harmless mistakes made by overenthusiastic amateurs.
Yeah.
As scholars like John Hoops argue, these myths are actively weaponized in the service of dispossession and oppression.
Yeah.
Fake fieldwork is conducted explicitly to steal indigenous achievements. By claiming that magnificent ancient monuments were actually built by lost white tribes or Atlanteans or even extraterrestrials, these theorists are actively erasing the ingenuity, the history, and the very humanity of indigenous peoples.
It's historical theft, pure and simple. And the two biggest targets of this kind of theft, without a doubt, are ancient Egypt and the Maya civilization. Let's look at their greatest hits, starting with Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza is an absolute magnet for this stuff.
It really is. The theories range from Charles Piazzi Smith in the 1800s claiming the pyramid was so mathematically perfect that it could only have been built by God himself,
That's true.
to modern claims by authors like Scott Creighton that it was a massive recovery vault built by Atlanteans to survive a global flood. And of course, the ever-popular ancient alien theory. Graham Hancock even argues the pyramids are a legacy of an advanced global civilization destroyed by a comet. Alongside this, you have Robert Schacht's Sphinx water erosion hypothesis.
Oh, I've seen specials on that.
Right, which claims the Great Sphinx is thousands of years older than accepted based on supposed rain weathering patterns, totally ignoring the surrounding geological context.
And real Egyptologists like Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner heavily contest all of this because it ignores the massive amount of societal evidence we actually have from the Old Kingdom. We actually can track the evolution of Egyptian pyramid building.
Exactly. It's a very clear lineage.
They didn't just pop up out of nowhere as perfect alien structures.
Mm-hmm.
It was a clear human process of trial and error. First, the Egyptians built mastabas. These are just flat-roofed, rectangular brick tombs.
Right.
Then, a brilliant architect named Imhotep decided to stack those mastabas on top of each other, creating the step pyramid of Djoser.
Right. They were experimenting. They were figuring it out.
Exactly. Then you have the Maiden Pyramid, which actually collapsed during construction because the angle was too steep.
A literal engineering failure.
Yes. Then they built the Bent Pyramid, which literally changes its angle halfway up because the ancient engineers realized it was starting to crack and they panicked. You can literally see their math mistake frozen in stone.
I love that example.
Right. After fixing their math, they built the Red Pyramid, and finally they perfected the math for the Great Pyramid. It wasn't aliens. It was human beings practicing engineering over centuries.
That is the ultimate scientific counter to these alternative claims, the mundane physical reality we keep finding. Take the Diary of Mirror, for instance.
The Diary of who?
Mirror, M-E-R-E-R. This isn't a theory. It's an actual physical papyrus document discovered near the Red Sea. It was written by a middle-ranking official named Mirror, who was directly involved in the construction of the Great Pyramid.
Wait, we have a diary from the actual construction.
We do. The diary literally acts as a logbook, detailing the daily transportation of limestone blocks by boat along the Nile to the construction site by human workers.
Wow.
It's a logistics ledger. It leaves absolutely zero room for Atlantean levitation devices.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The fringe theories aren't just about the buildings, they're about the people, too. we have to talk about the curse of the pharaohs.
Oh, the classic mummy's curse.
Right. When archaeologist Howard Carter discovered King Tut's intact tomb in 1922, the financial backer of the expedition, Lord Carnarvon, died a few months later.
Which sparked a frenzy.
The global press went wild. They claimed it was a supernatural mummy's curse that killed him, and rumors spread that the lights in Cairo mysteriously flickered out the exact moment he died. But if you actually look at the medical records, Lord Carnarvon didn't die from a magical hex.
No, he didn't.
He accidentally sliced open a mosquito bite while shaving. The cut got infected, which led to severe blood poisoning, sepsis, and then pneumonia. It was a tragic pre-antibiotic medical reality, cynically turned into a supernatural legend just to sell newspapers.
And that insatiable desire for a sensational story over a complex truth also heavily drives the pseudoarchaeology surrounding the Maya civilization. Historians often refer to this as Mayanism, a collection of New Age beliefs that completely romanticize and mystify the ancient Maya.
Right.
The absolute most famous example of this was the 10,012 apocalypse phenomenon.
Oh, I remember this. Everyone thought the world was ending.
Right. It was entirely based on a profound misunderstanding of the Maya long count calendar. This specific calendar tracks long cycles of time, and one of those major cycles, spanning roughly 5,126 solar years, happened to end on December 21st, 2012. Fringe theorists found a single set of hieroglyphs from a site called Tortuguero that mentioned a deity arriving at the end of this cycle, and they immediately assumed it meant a global cataclysm.
But the mechanism of that calendar isn't a ticking time bomb. It's literally like the odometer on your car. When your car hits 99,999 miles, it rolls over to zero.
Exactly.
The car doesn't explode, you just start a new mile. The Maya were just starting a new cycle of time.
Exactly. The Maya themselves viewed it as a time of renewal, not an apocalypse. But the sensationalism didn't stop in 2012. There's an author named Maurice Cotterell who looked at the incredibly intricate carved sarcophagus lid of the famous Maya ruler Kinnick Jena Pakal.
Okay.
Instead of analyzing what the symbols actually meant to the Maya people, Cotterell claimed the carving showed Pakal operating the controls of a mechanical spaceship, complete with exhaust flames, proving the Maya had extraterrestrial intelligence.
But what is it actually showing?
If you understand Maya iconography, it's a deeply spiritual, earthly depiction. Pakal is shown at the moment of his death, falling down the trunk of the world tree, which is a central concept in Maya cosmology, descending into the underworld, Itzibalba. What fringe theorists call spaceship exhaust are actually the stylized roots of the world tree in the gaping jaws of the underworld centipede.
Wow.
They are stripping away a beautiful cultural theology to insert a cheap sci-fi narrative.
Now, I want to push back on one claim here on behalf of anyone listening who might be on the fence, because this next one sounds really convincing. What about the claim of pre-Columbian contact between Egypt and the Americas?
Ah, the cocaine mummies.
Yes. The theory goes that traces of nicotine and cocaine were found in the tissue of Egyptian mummies. Now, tobacco and coca are South American plants. If they found cocaine in an Egyptian mummy, isn't that a smoking gun that ancient Egyptians were sailing across the Atlantic Ocean thousands of years before Columbus? How does mainstream science explain that away?
It sounds like an airtight case until you look at the underlying biology and botany.
Okay, break it down for us.
The scientific counter to this was brilliantly provided by researchers like Duncan Edlin. He demonstrated that you don't need transatlantic voyages to explain this anomaly. The biological reality is that plants belonging to the Solanaceae family, the nightshade family, which includes belladonna and mandrake, were entirely native to ancient Egypt and were heavily used in their medicines.
So they already had these plants.
Yes. And those native Egyptian plants naturally contain tropane alkaloids, including both nicotine and the chemical compounds very closely related to cocaine.
Oh, wow.
So the mummies absorbed these chemicals through local Egyptian plants, not through imported South American narcotics. Furthermore, we have a massive, incredibly detailed body of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic literature, and they never once mention outfitting a fleet to sail across a massive, unknown ocean to a new continent.
That makes total sense. So with all these wild theories circulating aliens, lost continents, mummy curses, transatlantic voyages, and generating massive TV ratings for shows with millions of viewers, how should the actual scientific community respond? Because looking at all this, it presents a huge dilemma for academia.
It is a deeply divisive issue among professionals. On one hand, you have the perspective of prominent archaeologists like Garrett Fagan and Kenneth Feder. Their stance is essentially, you cannot reason with unreason.
Meaning don't even try.
Right. They argue that engaging in public debate with fringe theorists is absolutely pointless because pseudo-archaeologists fundamentally deny logic and the scientific method. Entering into a televised debate just turns into a slanging match. It mathematically elevates the fringe theory, puts it on equal footing with actual science, and legitimizes anti-science in the eyes of the public.
But can academics really afford to just ignore this and hope it goes away? I mean, Kenneth Feder actually conducted a survey of his own college archaeology students. These are young people actively paying money to study the subject at a university level.
Yeah, this stat is wild.
And the results showed a staggering 12% of them actually believe that King Tut's curse killed people upon discovery. That's not the general public, that's archaeology students. If professionals don't engage and push back, doesn't the misinformation just win by default?
This raises an important question, and it's the exact point argued by archaeologist Cornelius Holtorf. He takes a very different view from Fagan. He argues that academics are often entirely too opinionated and patronizing when dealing with the public's curiosity.
That's a fair point.
He advocates for a much more inclusive attitude, pointing out that science evolves. For instance, what we now call archaeoastronomy.
What's that?
It's the rigorous study of how ancient people understood and aligned structures with the sky. That used to be dismissed as a fringe pseudo-archaeology before it was refined, tested, and adopted by mainstream science.
Oh, interesting.
But the catch-22 is undeniable. Television networks and internet platforms heavily fund pseudo-archaeology for short-term financial gain because it's sensational, it's easy to digest, and it keeps eyeballs on the screen. It is highly visible. If scientists engage, they risk giving it unwarranted credibility. If they ignore it, the public is abandoned to an ocean of misinformation.
It's an incredibly tough spot for historians, scientists, and educators. So to recap the journey we've taken you on today, we've explored exactly how pseudo-archaeology operates entirely backward without the scientific method, writing its own rules and stripping away context to fit predetermined conclusions.
Yeah.
We've seen how its proponents play the victim, likening themselves to Galileo fighting a supposedly corrupt academic establishment while secretly craving that very establishment's approval.
The irony is rich.
We've uncovered the truly dark, nationalist, and colonialist underbelly of these theories that actively seek to erase indigenous history. We've busted the enduring myths of Egyptian curses, Mayan spaceships, and cocaine mummies by looking at the actual biological and physical evidence. And we've seen the very real struggle that modern academics face in trying to combat this overwhelming tide of highly profitable, entertaining fiction.
It is a complex, constantly shifting landscape, where the human desire for quick mystery often completely overshadows the profound, real, and hard-earned achievements of ancient human beings.
And that leaves us with a final thought I want you to really mull over. There's a fascinating detail in the research regarding the ancient Maya city of Tikal, located in modern-day Guatemala.
Beautiful site.
In the 1990s, pseudo-archaeological claims and television specials arguing that ancient aliens had carved the magnificent stones in Tikal caused a massive boom in international tourism. The public attention was huge. People flocked to the site.
But there's a catch.
Right. But the local Maya people, the actual descendants of the architects who built those structures, rarely received the money from that economic boost. So the next time you sit down on your couch and turn on an entertaining fringe documentary about ancient aliens or lost continents, you have to ask yourself, are you just having harmless fun? Or are you accidentally funding the exploitation and the historical erasure of the very cultures you find so fascinating?
It really makes you realize that how we choose to view the history of the past has very real, very tangible consequences for people living in the present.
It absolutely does. It all comes right back to that crime scene we talked about at the beginning. Are you going to look at the fingerprints, the stratigraphy, the DNA, the real tangible evidence left behind by the brilliant human beings who came before us? Or are you going to point at the lamp in the corner just because it makes for a better story? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning what you read, always look for the evidence, and we'll catch you next time.